show you why Dell made this unprecedented admission.
HP just made a decision that could weaken Microsoft more than any competitor ever has, because for the first time in 35 years, a major PC manufacturer is making Windows optional. Not removed, not banned, optional. Starting in 2025, HP plans to ship 40% of its consumer laptops with Linux as the default operating system. If you want Windows, you have to ask for it, and you pay extra. That may sound small. It's not, because Windows being pre-installed was never just a feature. It was Microsoft's entire advantage. And in this video, I'm going to show you the real reason HP did this. The math that made it inevitable. How Microsoft tried to stop it, and why Dell and others may follow. If you clicked because you saw HP replacing Windows, you're in the right place. But here's the part nobody talks about. This wasn't a tech decision. It was a financial survival decision. And when you see the numbers, you'll understand why this changes everything. For decades, Microsoft didn't need to convince you to use Windows. It was already there. You bought a laptop, you opened it. Windows was waiting. That's called default power. Most people never change defaults. That's how Microsoft built a multi-trillion-dollar empire. But here's the problem. Defaults only work if the manufacturers still benefit. And that's where things started to crack, because Windows 11 quietly introduced something that changed the equation. Hardware restrictions, licensing costs, update behavior, and those changes hit HP directly. Not emotionally, financially, and when money gets involved, companies move fast. Let's slow down here, because this is where everything changed. When HP installs Windows on a laptop, they pay Microsoft about $60 per device. That's the visible cost. But that wasn't the real problem. The real problem was what Windows forced HP to build around it. Windows 11 requires specific key CPU generations, TPM 2.0 security chips, more RAM, faster storage. Why does that matter? Because budget laptops survive on tiny margins. If a laptop sells for $399, HP might only make $20 or $30 profit. So when Windows forces $40 in hardware upgrades, that doesn't reduce profit, it erases it. And Linux doesn't require those restrictions. Now here's the part most people never think about. Support. When Windows updates break something, customers don't call Microsoft, they call HP. Each support interaction costs money. Windows laptops average about 2.3 support calls over their lifecycle. Linux test units, less than 0.6. That difference scales fast. Millions of units multiplied by support costs, and suddenly, Windows isn't just expensive, it's noisy, and noise costs money. Now let's talk about returns. Nearly 10% of Windows laptops get returned within 30 days. Most aren't broken. The complaint is usually, it's slow. It feels complicated. This isn't what I expected. Each return costs HP around $68 in processing and resale loss. Spread across total sales, about $8 extra burden per device. Now stack it clearly. $60 license, $40 hardware requirements, $30 support costs, $8 return impact. That's $138 on a $400 to $600 laptop. At that point, HP had to ask a dangerous question. Is Windows still helping us? Or is it the most expensive part of the machine? Because Linux costs $0 in licensing, no forced hardware combinations, fewer support calls, lower return rates. So the comparison wasn't technical, it was simple. $138 versus $0. And once that became clear, the conversation stopped being emotional. It became mathematical, and math doesn't negotiate. After HP saw the $138 problem, they didn't make an announcement. They didn't call a press conference. They didn't attack Microsoft publicly. They did something smarter. They tested quietly. Because before you change a 35-year default, You need proof. So in early 2024, HP selected 40,000 laptops. Same hardware, same price range, but instead of Windows, they pre-installed Linux. No marketing campaign, no homepage banner, no big headlines. They simply listed them on HP.com. And here's the first surprising part. They priced them slightly lower, just $50 to $75 cheaper than the Windows version. Not free, not dramatic, just enough to see what would happen. Now here's the question HP wanted answered. If customers are given the choice, will they still pick Windows? Or was Windows only dominant because it was the default? That was the real experiment, and the result came fast. The Linux models sold out in 11 days, no promotion, no hype, just organic demand. HP had to rush additional inventory, but selling out wasn't the most important part. What happened after the sale was, support calls dropped by over 80%. Let that sink in. Linux buyers called support 0.4 times on average. Windows buyers? Over 2 times. That's not a small difference. That's operational silence. And silence is profitable. Then came return rates. Windows return rate, nearly 10%. Linux return rate, under 2%. And here's the twist. The Linux laptops weren't more powerful. They weren't premium. They were the same machines, only the operating system changed, which raised a dangerous internal question. Was Windows the source of friction? Customer reviews told the same story. Linux models averaged higher ratings. Common comments said, "It's faster. It feels clean. No annoying updates. Battery lasts longer." And here's the important insight HP discovered. Most customers weren't using heavy desktop software. They were using Chrome, YouTube, Netflix, Google Docs, email. For that workflow, Linux wasn't a downgrade. It was enough. And sometimes, enough wins. Now here's the part that changed everything. By December 2024, Linux laptops made up about 8% of HP's direct sales, but they were the most profitable 8%. Higher margins, lower support cost, lower return rate, higher satisfaction. That's when the conversation inside HP shifted from, should we offer Linux? To, why are we still defaulting to Windows? And once that question is asked seriously, the old system starts to collapse. Because remember what we uncovered in Chapter 3, $138 versus $0. Now, HP had real-world proof, not theory, not ideology, data, and data is harder to ignore than opinion. But here's where things get even more interesting, because once Microsoft heard about this quiet success, they didn't stay quiet. And that reaction tells you everything about how serious this shift really is. Up until now, this sounded like a smart experiment, but this is where HP stopped debating, because once they compared the profit margins, there was no going back. Same laptop, same screen, same battery, same factory, only one difference, Windows or Linux. Here's what the numbers showed. Windows version, profit margin about 6% on a $379 laptop. HP makes around $22, one unexpected cost, and that profit disappears. Now the Linux version. No $60 license, no forced hardware upgrades, lower support costs, lower return rates. Profit margin? Over 30%. That's more than $110 on the same machine. Same device. 5 times the profit. Now scale it. HP ships over 50 million computers a year. If 40% move to Linux, that's over 20 million units. Multiply that extra $100 plus margin, and you're looking at over $1 billion in improved profitability without raising prices, without selling more laptops, just by changing the default. And this is when the internal conversation changed. Windows wasn't just an operating system anymore. It was a margin suppressor. And once HP saw that clearly, they had to ask, if Linux makes us more money, why is Windows still the default? Now imagine you're Dell watching this. HP improves margins, lowers return rates, keeps customers satisfied. What do? Because this isn't ideology, it's math. And when math favors one side, markets follow, which is exactly when Microsoft realized this wasn't a small experiment anymore, it was a structural shift. And that's when they reacted. When Microsoft learned what HP was planning, they didn't ignore it. They moved fast. Because this wasn't about one product line. This was about control. For 35 years, Microsoft's biggest advantage wasn't better software. It was distribution. Windows was everywhere by default. If HP removed that default, the foundation started cracking. So Microsoft responded the way large companies do. First, money. They offered HP a 30% discount on Windows licenses. That's significant. It would reduce the $60 license closer to $40. On paper, that looks like a win. But here's what HP already knew. The license wasn't the biggest problem. It was the total cost. Even with the discount, hardware requirements still applied. Support calls didn't disappear. Return rates didn't magically drop. Windows was still more expensive than Linux, discount or not. So HP declined. That's when Microsoft escalated. Second move, marketing pressure. Microsoft provides manufacturers with marketing development funds, co-branded ads, retail promotions, incentives. HP reportedly receives hundreds of millions in these benefits. The message was subtle but clear. If you move away from Windows, that support changes. Now pause for a second. For years, this is how Microsoft kept alignment. Incentives, partnership, leverage. But HP had already done the math. Projected Linux savings? Over $1 billion annually. Losing marketing funds hurt, but it didn't outweigh the structural margin shift. So HP didn't move. Then came the third layer. Contractual pressure. Microsoft suggested HP's licensing agreements required Windows to be prominently positioned. In other words, Linux couldn't replace it as default. HP's legal team reviewed the contracts. Nothing required Windows to be the primary option. Offering Windows was required. Making it default was not. And this is where the power dynamic shifted. Microsoft realized something uncomfortable. HP had leverage. Because if Microsoft terminated the agreement, HP could still sell Linux machines, but Microsoft would lose millions of Windows shipments overnight. The threat wasn't symmetrical, and when leverage flips, negotiation changes. So Microsoft backed off, not publicly, quietly. And that silence said more than any press release, because for the first time in decades, a major PC manufacturer proved something. Windows was powerful, but not irreplaceable. And once that idea spreads, it doesn't stay contained. Now here's the real question. If HP stood firm, who follows next? Because if Dell sees Microsoft couldn't stop HP, the fear barrier disappears. And when fear disappears, momentum begins. HP is the second largest PC manufacturer in the world. Over 50 million units shipped annually. If 40% go Linux, that's over 20 million Linux laptops per year. Now, imagine Dell follows. Add Lenovo's existing Linux deployments. Suddenly, over 30% of global PCs could ship without Windows as default. For the first time in decades, Microsoft wouldn't control the starting point. And when defaults disappear, market share shifts. Slowly at first, then suddenly. Here's something people overlook. Retailers prefer products with fewer returns, fewer complaints, higher reviews. Linux laptops are showing lower return rates, higher satisfaction, better battery life perception. Amazon's algorithm rewards products with better ratings. Best Buy pushes products that create fewer headaches. Retailers don't care about Microsoft's dominance. They care about margins. And Linux improves those. Microsoft can't control retail ranking systems. They can't suppress customer reviews. And that's where the quiet transformation begins. Now you might think, Didn't Chromebooks already do this? Not exactly. Chromebooks targeted schools and budget buyers. Linux on mainstream laptops is different. It's a full desktop system. It's flexible. It doesn't lock users into Google. It's not limited to web apps. This isn't a side experiment. It's a structural change in the traditional PC model. And that's why it's more dangerous to Microsoft. The real power wasn't Windows features. It was distribution. If Windows stops being automatic, Microsoft must compete. And when competition happens, margins shrink. Negotiation power weakens. Market share becomes volatile. HP's decision doesn't end Windows, but it removes something critical: automatic dominance. And once that's gone, it rarely comes back. Here's the timeline to watch. If HP's Linux rollout performs well, other manufacturers follow. If retailers see lower return rates, they promote Linux more aggressively. If customers adapt easily, momentum builds. This doesn't happen overnight. It happens gradually, then suddenly. And in 18 months, we may look back at this moment as the turning point. Remember what I said at the beginning? This wasn't about preference. It was about economics. And economics are relentless. HP didn't attack Microsoft. They optimized their margins, and sometimes that's more dangerous than competition, because if Linux becomes good enough for most users, Microsoft's pricing power weakens. And when pricing power weakens, everything changes. In my next video, I'm going to break down how Microsoft could respond and whether they have a long-term strategy to stop the shift, because they're not sitting still. And what they're building behind the scenes is even more interesting. If you want that breakdown, subscribe, because this story isn't over. It's just getting started.